Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting us here today to share some information with you and to answer your questions. I'm Garland. I'm the Chief Academic Officer at the Department of Public Instruction, and Professional Development and Standards Development and Support to Low Performing Schools and Accountability all fall under me, and in some way or the other are touched by the standard course of study and in essence by the Common Core. So to follow up on what Dr. Atkinson was explaining, what I want to talk to you about are the differences between the new standards and the old standards, and to actually show you some items, some objectives that students would be able to do under the new standards if they indeed understood the knowledge and skills implied in that standard. So the first thing is to share with you, we have a lot of new teachers, young teachers in our schools. A lot of the teachers my age are beginning to walk out the door in terms of retirement. So we do have new teachers coming in every year. What we're finding is our new teachers really do like online professional development where they can use online resources. That's the way that they learn. They learn a little differently than we did back when I was in school. And so the folks at the Department of Public Instruction, our professional development team, our curriculum and instruction team that really know math, really know language arts, and our team that works to support our struggling schools have all had some input into developing some online tools. So this screen and next screen are simply screenshots that when a teacher comes online at the Department of Public Instruction, they can find support for building their own knowledge and skills and what the standards look like. We have worked for the past 3 years in getting our teachers ready to teach the standards. Now, as Dr. Atkinson implied, that's an ongoing process. It has to be continuous. We can't say, well, check, we've done that. We have to continue to build depth of knowledge with those standards with our teachers and with our students. If you were to go back and look at when we started the ABCs, the first time we ever tested reading and mathematics in our state, where we had our own assessments, only about half the students in our state passed. By the time that we finished the ABCs, we had proficiencies for more or less across the state, well into the 80s. Over time, teachers become more comfortable with standards, students become more comfortable with standards. So how do these standards differ? Well, for one thing, our standards in English language arts build knowledge through content-rich, nonfiction, and informational text. We've heard a lot about losing literature. I think it's important to note that since the 90s, North Carolina has been focusing on nonfiction and informational text. In fact, our old EOGs, since the 90s, have had informational text and nonfiction on those tests. A typical test would have 2 items of literature for a student to read and answer questions, 1 item of poetry, and 2 items of nonfiction. An example of nonfiction might be an excerpt from the biography of Benjamin Franklin, or an excerpt from maybe the first person who climbed Mount Everest. So typically a science text, a social studies text, and 3 literary texts. So that's not new for North Carolina, but for the Common Core standards, it is now a part of those requirements. We also require, the new standards, reading and writing grounded in evidence from the text. So what does that mean and how is that different? In the past, we might teach the poem, The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. A follow-up question might be, what were the causes of the Revolutionary War? Well, the causes of the Revolutionary War are important for a student to know, but actually reading the poem, The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, and using Common Core, then the student will go into the text of the Common Core to find out what Longfellow was trying to say, in addition to trying to learn the causes of the Revolutionary War. And then the third difference is regular practice with complex text and its academic vocabulary. So why do we know that that's important? The university system has told us that it's very important. Our students, as we are told, have been going to higher education, either the community college or the university system, and they have not been prepared to read the textbooks that the university system and community college feel that the students have to read. So learning academic vocabulary and being able to really dig in and understand complex text is needed by all of our students. Certainly we have some very high-flying students for whom that has not been a problem, but all of our children have not been prepared at that level. We also have seen differences in the mathematics standards. So for one thing, We are to focus where the standards focus. Now what that means is teachers have to deliberately teach and teach to understanding the standards that are found by grade level. Classrooms, like Dr. Atkinson, for years I've been in classrooms as well, and if you go in and you look at the standards and you see what teachers are teaching, it doesn't always match. And so there is a deliberate focus on what is actually in the standards for that grade level. And we also need to make sure that we are linking those standards from one grade level to the next, so that if something is in third grade, it's reinforced in fourth grade, but we don't teach it as if students have never seen it. So the goal is to take some of the time out of review and to move more in depth in a standard and not repeat what has already been taught. And then finally, the whole notion of conceptual understanding. So we've heard a lot about, well, it's not developmentally appropriate for a child to do algebra or proportion in K-5 because they're not ready to learn conceptually. And we agree that you can't take it conceptually for them to learn. But if you take a pie and you divide it into 5 slices, you can teach fractions to a child in kindergarten by using concrete examples. We certainly wouldn't hand them a worksheet with fractions on it and expect them to be able to do it. But with concrete objects, you can teach conceptual understanding to a very young child, and then as they develop and take the concrete away, then they can see it mentally in the future. So, real differences, particularly in mathematics, bringing rigor down, but providing those supports for students so they can be successful. As Dr. Atkinson pointed out, we have had alignment with higher education. For the first time, for as long as I can remember, we now have clear alignment between K-12 education and the community college in terms of what does it take to move from one system to the next. To give you a very specific example, faculty at the community college have reviewed the Common Core standards, and they have shared back through their chief academic officer that if our students who go there know the standards as they are written, then our students will be prepared for what comes next at the community college. In fact, if a student takes Math 1, 2, and 3, which is Common Core in high school, that goes through the equivalent of Algebra 2, then they may go to the community college system if they have a 2.6 and they've taken an additional math course their senior year, and that's at the choice of the student. The student gets to decide what their fourth math course is. Common Core really only goes through the 11th grade in terms of mathematics. So in essence, our students determine what their next course is outside of Common Core. But if they take Math 1, Math 2, and Math 3, which is all of Common Core in high school, they go to the community college, they have a 2.6, they go directly into a credit-bearing course in mathematics. No remediation. So we finally have come up to a clear pathway for what it takes for high school to move to the community college and to do away with remediation in terms of mathematics. If students make that GPA and they're successful in that third math course. We've never had that in place before. And if you talk to the community college, the area where we have the most difficulty is in the area of mathematics. So we have clear articulation now that we have standards at our community college meet the needs of the students going there. We've also had the Porter College Grant. The Porter College Grant is a grant that we have had. We share that grant with the community college system and with the university system and with our teachers in K-12. We have had for the past couple of years joint meetings where we have talked about the Common Core, and we have figured out how to articulate Common Core back and forth across the systems so that professors can be prepared for students who have been successful in Common Core, and that so our professors in the Common Core who are teaching our future teachers know what to put into those courses in terms of content development. So we feel like we've done a better job aligning with higher education now that we have Common Core. So what might those examples look like for a third grader? So a third grader, in the past, we would have handed a student a series of questions on a worksheet where we might have divided 60 by 5, by 12, by 10, by 3, and asked them how many buckets they could put sand in. So what makes this more rigorous? The students have to determine how many multiples of 60 there are and the different combinations of buckets where they could come up with 60 pounds of sand. So rather than having a series of problems, the students are creating their own problems that can meet that requirement. In an 8th grade math class, you might see where Bill is going to order some new jerseys for his team, and he's trying to decide where his money will best be spent. So one company, Printed, has a charge of $21.50 for each jersey. So Bill is required then to set up the equation for how he would solve what the cost would be at a per unit price. Then the second thing that Bill would have to do, Top Print is also printing jerseys, but they have a base setup fee and a fee per unit. So then Bill has to determine his own equation for how he would determine cost. Then he has to take those two equations and figure out which one would be to his advantage, and at what point it becomes cheaper to have a setup fee and a lower jersey price than it is to have a set price from the beginning. So this is where children are creating their own equations rather than solving a list of equations on a sheet. Now, why is this important? In real life, many of us have always said, well, when do I ever use algebra? This is algebra. So any Little League coach might be making this type of decision. So students are learning from a real-world context how to do algebra rather than just being handed a worksheet with algebra problems to solve. 4th grade language arts, we've always taught narrative writing in 4th grade. So the next two slides are simply about Oliver the dog and his master Jet. And you're given a prompt, and then the student has to take those prompts and write an ending to the story of what might happen next. Then in 6th grade English language arts, and this one I know our schools actually are dealing with all over the state. So the next 4 slides deal with the 6th grade language arts example. So a little description of cell phones in school, whether to allow them or not. The next slide lists the many positives for what cell phones can add in a school. The next slide then is all of the negatives for having cell phones in schools. And then the prompt is, based on what you have read in the text, then write an argumentative paper using those reasons as your evidence for why you would support or oppose having cell phones in school. So it's teaching students to use from evidence and make an argument instead of just using something at random. So then the high school example, and Senator Tillman gets at some of your questions about curriculum versus standards. The standard, I'm going to read 4 standards for you. One is citing strong and thorough textual evidence and doing an analysis. One is determining central idea of a text. One is determining the meaning of words and phrases in a text. And then one is determining the author's point of view. Now, in your attachments, in your handout, you should see a full unit on Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. The 4 standards that I just listed for you is what the student should know and be able to do. Those are the standards. That's required, that a student can do those 4 things. This is curriculum. The unit that is on the Gettysburg Address in your packet is curriculum. This is an example of how these 4 standards could be taught. They are required. This unit is not. This is curriculum. So one teacher may choose to go through the Gettysburg Address and pull out activities that would teach those 4 standards. Somebody else may choose a speech by Martin Luther King, by Winston Churchill. Somebody might teach it through a biography of JFK. So it would be entirely up to the teacher or the school or the central office in some cases what type of instructional activity would be taught to teach these 4 standards. So this is totally a local decision. We at the department have no mandated curriculum, or in fact, no mandated textbook. That is a local decision. What is required is that students learn how to do those 4 things that I just listed. So that's the difference between a standard and curriculum. And then the final one, in fact, Dr. Atkinson referred to this one with her nephew. The final one is a math example that's in your packet. And you see 4 different ways that a sale might be advertised. 2 for the price of 1, Buy two, get 50% off the second. Buy one, get 25% off the second, or three for the price of two. Come up with a way to determine which of these is actually to your benefit by finding the unit price, but you have to tell how you did it. So what is your best bet and what is your least bet? So that's an example of a high school math question. So those are real examples of what the Common Core would look like in a classroom, but those would be determined by the teacher or by the school system if they have a local curriculum director that works with teachers to develop common curriculum. But nothing is required in terms of curriculum. And so that completes my comment. I'm happy to answer your questions.
All right, thank you, Dr. Garland.